Hello and welcome to this mentor session for the latest generation film contest featuring award-winning producers from Twin Cities PBS. I'm Angela Sterin, Senior Director of Advancement at the Lincoln Presidential Foundation. Our foundation's mission is to share the story of Abraham Lincoln's life, legacy, and leadership with all people. Our latest generation film contest is inspired by Lincoln's question to an Indianapolis crowd in 1861. Shall the Union and shall the liberties of this country be preserved to the latest generation? This contest invites young adults ages 14 to 22 to create short historical films from 5 to 8 minutes. This year's theme, On This Land, encourages filmmakers to produce works rooted in their local geography, fostering a deeper understanding of the events, figures, and movements that have shaped their communities and beyond. This first year, the contest is open to participants in the Midwest with plans for future expansion. Submissions are due by December 31st, 2024, with cash prizes ranging from $500 to $2,000 awarded in 3 separate age brackets. Winning films will premiere at a red carpet event in Chicago, spring 2025. Our mentor sessions are open to everyone and are designed to share the processes that filmmakers use to create compelling work for the public. This contest and these sessions are made possible by a generous grant from the Better Angel Society through the Amy Marjoram Berg Education Fund. Today, we are excited to welcome Leya Hale and Kevin Dragseth. Leya Hale comes from the Sisseton, Wahpeton, Dakota, and Diné nations. She's a multiple regional Emmy producer for Twin Cities PBS. Her work brings visibility to Indigenous lifeways and issues impacting her community. Best known for her feature films, The People's Protectors and Bring Her Home, both distributed by PBS. Kevin Dragseth has been creating story-driven, human-centered media for more than 25 years, specializing in documentary style and multicultural storytelling. He seeks out undertold stories and underheard voices, and has been producing at Twin Cities PBS since 2015. In that time, produced films on a wide range of issues, including childhood trauma, housing justice, science and technology, historical documentaries, and scores of short-form work in Somali, Hmong, Spanish, and other languages. Before we begin, I encourage you to submit your questions in the box below, and we'll address as many as possible. Now, let's welcome Kevin and Leya.
I'm awful at PowerPoint, but I'm going to do my best here. So somebody tell me if this is working correctly. Anybody, are we seeing a PowerPoint there? Okay.
Yes.
Take that as a yes. All right. I found I'm very intuitive. That is, I come to understand things and I don't really understand why I understand them. So I don't have kind of I'm not a academically trained filmmaker. I learned all of this kind of by doing, which is one way to do it. And so that's what I'll bring to this. Leya wonderfully comes from has some more kind of academic training in that. So that I think we're a good pairing this way. One of the things we talked about is that one of the risks when engaging in telling a story is that you want to tell the biggest story you can. Excuse me. And that you want to make the comprehensive documentary. We want to make the end all be all documentary. And of course, your projects are much shorter, so that helps you stay focused. But it is hard at any length to know when is enough or when is too much. How many details can I fit in? So my kind of mantra here is tell the story that you can tell. You could try to tell the complete story of the Wright brothers or whatever your subject is, but you won't. Like you can't get all the things. It won't all fit. It won't work as a story. And so this is me giving you permission to not tell the complete story. Aiming too high puts a lot of distance between you and what you're trying to accomplish. That's everything's just further away. Big story can be paralyzing. Where do I start? Where does it stop? Will it work out? And what will I do if it doesn't? And what if I can't tell it well? What if I don't have access to the things? Or I your ambitions can kind of get in your own way. So this is me giving again permission to tell the story that you actually can manage to tell. It'll be better for a lot of reasons. One of which is I just mentioned, will you have access to the people and the resources that you need? Can you find the storytellers? Can you track down the photos and videos, the research materials, the experts? Are they scattered all over the world, or is it somebody in your neighborhood or in your town that you can actually get in front of? I don't, you may have already picked your topics by now, but work with what you can, family, neighbors, a historical site, a faith community, something that is kind of accessible to you is way better than, trying to get a meeting with the governor or something like that. Is it personal to you? It doesn't have to be, but if it is personal for you, your passion for the story will drive you to tell it better. You'll feel like you have some stake, some ownership of that, and you won't be satisfied telling it kind of in a boring way because it reflects something that matters to you. It will make it more emotionally connected for viewers. They'll kind of vibe off of how much you care about your project and telling it well. And even, we almost entirely work in nonfiction, but it still needs to connect emotionally. People need to kind of feel like they're connected to the story, to the characters, to what's at stake on the journey, whatever that story is. So being personally connected to it, in addition to being easier to tell and better to tell, also makes it more accessible to your viewers. Except for Ken Burns, nobody really tries to make those comprehensive documentaries anymore. I'm sure there's somebody, but if you look on Netflix, you look on PBS, you look on lots of places, people are doing these really kind of specific corners of a story. My brother-in-law is a professor and had to do his PhD, and you don't tell the complete story of something. You tell this person in this town doing this work in whatever century. Like, it's really focused, and that's on purpose. It's not, we don't need the big picture. The totality is often less interesting than the slice that you choose to tell. I read a great book by Atul Gawande, who had said, there was a time when physicians they were just doctors, and you went to the doctor and they knew pretty much everything. We now know so much more that nobody can be that generalist. It just doesn't really exist. Everybody has, even in med school, some kind of specialization. So, and I took that as like permission for us to do the same thing. Leia can tell any amazing story. She's going to tell ones that she understands well and is connected to way better. And I would like to think the same is true for me, and the same can be true for you. The concept of intersectionality, which was coined by a sociologist and civil rights activist Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 80s. She was focusing that word, I'm sure you've heard it, in talking about kind of when one kind of identity overlaps with another identity. So being a woman and being an African American in this country, and what does that intersectionality mean for, often negative impacts in our lives. I also would say that intersectionality can be really great in storytelling because it can give you really cool specificities that overlap. So somebody with this life experience and this other thing, like, that makes a really interesting intersection that maybe nobody else has. And so if you look around, a lot of stories are being told that way by just kind of finding those interesting places where two very specific things meet. And then there's always going to be more story to tell. Any project that we finish, we left a lot out, and a lot of actually the decision making is, where do we stop? One of the projects I just finished is on the history of kind of local broadcast news in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And one of the questions was, why are we stopping where we are? Well, that's where we are. We just had to pick a place where we're not going to keep going. And you have to have a good reason for that, but it has to stop somewhere. Somebody else can make the next one, or you can make the next one, but you need those boundaries. And it's good because real life is interesting, and so there's always going to be more to say. This has been an interesting one for me. Choosing an audience, we say in our department or in our organization, that a film made for everyone is a film made for nobody. Because there isn't really there is kind of a general audience, or certainly kind of a PBS general audience that we can say is probably white, a little bit older, maybe college educated, but that's a kind of a typical viewing demographic. That isn't an audience. And we were given some really great information from a group called Harmony Labs that created a project called Narrative Observatory. I encourage you all to take a look at this, narrativeobservatory.org. This is all free, and they define audiences by what they value, not by kind of their, gender and race and income and stuff like that. That you can see that. That's the picture that's in the corner is a little thumbnail of that. But they define this really lovely quadrant of people whose values are driven by their interest in themselves on one end, on the left side, and then on the right side, their interest in us, kind of self-interest versus collective interest, and then from the top to the bottom, kind of preserving what we have versus changing the world. And then you get these interesting quadrants where I want to change the world, but I want to do it my way versus I want to preserve what we have, but I want what's good for people and all these other variations. It's really, really great stuff. And I encourage you to take a look at it because it really changed how I thought about who an audience is. And one of the last projects I did, I really took that to heart because we focused on former pro wrestler and Minnesota former governor Jesse Ventura, who fits one of those categories that we're not as good at talking to. And so that was a fun exercise in like, how do I tell a story for somebody who's not just like me? I'm really good at reaching people like me. So I encourage you to take a look at that. It's all free and really fascinating and fun. The other fun thing, if you have the time, is that as you're doing research or if you are working with media, books or photos or anything, that can actually be part of how you tell the story visually. And I've got an example here, but how many things have you seen where somebody is trying to find the old footage of something and you see them threading it up in the projector and, it takes a little bit of work and you have to have access to these things, but they can be a lot of fun and really brings the viewer into your story. They feel like they're on this kind of detective journey of finding the evidence and piecing it together and seeing what it says. So I've got a clip here that hopefully will play that is an example of this from a recent documentary. I think it's the Jesse Ventura one.
Hundreds and hundreds of tapes chronicling the ups and downs of the Ventura administration. With our unique access to
Ventura knew who he was.
We have many clips you won't see
And
anywhere.
what he was kind of a made-up character. His real name is Jim Janis, so he's even got a fictitious name.
Jesse Ventura's parents are really important to his background. They were both veterans.
So hopefully that played well for you, and you could hear it. The idea there was that the story we could tell, literally using the same rubric here, was that we had a lot of tape of Jesse Ventura from that period. And the original conversations were, let's, track down his sixth grade teacher and his best friend from high school and, all the kind of the traditional things you would do in a big, comprehensive documentary. Like I say, nobody really can make anymore. And we realized, one, we don't have access to those people. He's older. A lot of those people probably aren't around. He, at the time, was telling us that they had their own deal, and so they'd signed some kind of an exclusive with somebody else about interviews, and so we didn't have access to the family or family photos, and so that's literally what we had was some pictures of him that from a TV show that he appeared on, and so the best I could do was to show, the frame, and it was then it was like, whoa, the way to solve this is to show the tape. The tape is the story. Tape is a huge part of the story. And so kind of giving ourselves permission to say, let's tell the story through the tape, since it's going to be a character in the story, gave us not only permission, but then it made it interesting for viewers. And it also tapped into this kind of nostalgia for old technology that I think I've been told that in this digital virtual age, people, even young people, are really fascinated by buttons that click and, loud loud keyboard things. And, that there's this yearning for a kind of a more mechanical age. And so that was a fun way to play with that. And that's a recurring theme for me. So anyway, encourage you to, it's a little bit more work, but it can really help kind of bring your story to life visually. Be organized. I know I'm kind of bouncing around. Like I said, I'm kind of more intuitive than linear here. I did not, this is a relatively new concept to me. Show books are, in our department, are basically spreadsheets. They're Excel files that somebody makes before as we get going, and we track almost anything you can think of, particularly if it's archive photos and video that are coming from all over the place. Where did it come from? What kind of rights do we have? When was it, when was it published? Or, give it some description so we know it's different from this other very similar clip. Um, all kinds of things, a lot of newspaper articles, what newspaper is it from, all that stuff. This is the part of the process that I find very least interesting, but it is an absolute lifesaver. And so that's why I'm mentioning it early. It's not fun. It's tedious. Thankfully, I have a team who can do a lot of this stuff for me or with me. But as I've gotten used to this, like if ever there's a question, hey, anybody have an email address for so-and-so? Well, I bet I do. I bet it's in the show book. So again, kind of a lifesaver. And you can see this isn't even a complete list, but we borrowed props for a set. So who do we borrow it from, and who do they want it back? Do they want us to throw it away? We bought old TVs for the broadcast one. What happens to the TVs when we're done? You name it. It's a whole thing. Oops. But it's a lifesaver. So you make your own system, whatever works for you. There might be templates online. I don't know, but it has been kind of transformative for me to just be like, oh, those are all the details that I always that get lost, right? They're scribbled on a piece of paper somewhere. They're in an email somewhere. Getting it all together into one place is huge. And I wouldn't have thought of it. So I'm grateful to the other people in my world that have, and this is now standard for us. We don't even think about going into these big, complicated projects without this kind of stuff. This is another thing. I mean, I have always made bins and folders to sort media, but the breakthrough for me when I came to Twin Cities PBS was that at the Finder level, the OS level, there was a template of folders that we just copy over and start using. And then we use Adobe Premiere. In Premiere, there are templates that have all the folders. And so they just exist. And I don't have to remember, I don't have to recreate it. They're just there. We've all kind of, it's such a lifesaver to just, this stuff is all right there. You know where everything goes, you know where it's going to be. There might be examples online, make your own, whatever works for you. But, for me, it was like, here's a graphic. I better make a graphics folder. And, I shot in the field. I need some media folders. So, you do it as you need it, whereas this just exists. So try to, if you possible, create this muscle memory of just, you make it, you have it, a template standing by, you copy the template, don't use the original, copy it over, whatever works for you, but just, it's again, another thing that just it will prevent problems later. You'll be grateful. It'll be worth your trouble early on. Another one that has been really fun for me is, I've worked in multiple editing systems. My first system was Avid way back. And then Adobe Final Cut Apple Final Cut for years, and then eventually Premiere. And the tools have just gotten better. But one of the things that I have used, and I used it very differently across several projects, is markers and color coding of clips. One time I used the color coding for like, this is Act 1, this is Act 2, this is Act 3, and I just knew exactly where I was. Then there are other ones where these colors mean different things, and it's totally up to me in this case. Whatever helps me stay organized. In the markers, the colors can mean something. My editor, orange always means visual effects, and blue means audio notes or something. So he has his, but you can have yours. I have mine. You can be consistent. You can make it up as you go, whatever. But just, they're great tools. The one that I really loved is where you can, in Premiere, create a marker and then open the marker and change the duration. And so I use that all the time, particularly early, to say, this is the part where so-and-so talks about this. So I don't have to go looking for it. And I can see, the other cool thing is to see proportions of like, oh, that scene's really long, which I can tell from the length of that duration marker. So again, leave notes for yourself, your team, your editor, your whatever, whoever you've got. And then the assets themselves, you can color code those however you want, and I'll show you an example here. This is an early version of the broadcast news one that I just finished. And there were three main local TV stations that were competing. There was a CBS station, NBC station, and an independent station. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I was trying to like make sure we told enough of their stories and that things felt in balance. So if you look at the blue is WCCO, the red one is KSTP, and the white one is what is now KARE 11. And it helped me. And then green is like kind of independent historian types. I could really get the sense of, at a glance, how much of each show was dedicated to which story or which storytellers were active in there. And so it was hilarious because in edit, I was in edit for a long, long time, and I'd tell the editor, zoom out, and I'd be able to just point like it's right there. It's that second little red blob. I know, and I would be right because I know the show so well. So, and then there's again other ones where I've used these colors differently. So it isn't a single way to do it, but I found it to be incredibly helpful. For years, I just left them the same generic color, and they just sat there, and it didn't occur to me that I could use them in these multiple ways. Again, one of which was to see how much screen time each of these organizations was getting in the story. So that was kind of fun. And I'll talk a while about B-roll, and I'm trusting that you at least familiar with the concept. B-roll is what we use to illustrate to cover. So it's not just talking heads. It is optional. You don't have to use it, but it's fun to do. It brings shows to life. And so I thought I'd spend a little time on being kind of intentional about B-roll, that it has different purposes. And what was challenging for me in planning this was I've been doing this for so long that I don't actually think consciously about this stuff. So this was a good exercise for me to like ask myself, like, what are the different ways in which I use B-roll? It seems obvious if you do this a lot. Sometimes it is, but it's really not if you aren't thinking about it. There are multiple purposes, multiple reasons why you'd put footage or photos or something over or in place of somebody on camera. And for me, the thing is, again, kind of doing this at a level where I don't probably process this consciously or not, is for you to be conscious of which of these reasons, which of these purposes you're using and why. Like, what am I doing with this B-roll choice? So I'm going to start at the most simple. It hides edits. Somebody's talking, they messed up or they talked too long and I just need to trim it down. But now I have a jump cut, which can be okay. But if it isn't okay, I at least need to hide that edit. So here's a shot of something. Here's a wide shot of the library that this person's talking about or whatever. So at the bare minimum, it just hides the fact that we have to do this stuff to improve our storytelling. The second level is it illustrates what is being communicated verbally. The person's talking about the library, we show the library. See-say, we sometimes call it, or something like that. If you're hearing about it, you can show it. It helps with comprehension. It makes sense. It's logical. It's not super sophisticated. They're talking about this Civil War rifle. We show the Civil War rifle. It's kind of straightforward, but it is different than just hiding an edit. And so like, this is where I'm trying to be intentional. Like, what are the different reasons? So hiding edits, visually just showing what we're talking about at a low level. And then we can get more sophisticated. We can pull viewers into this story by being real and specific. So I could show any TV camera here. I'm showing a KSTP television camera here. This moment, this place, this person, this object comes to life. It's not any camera, it is this camera. That elevates storytelling. All of a sudden it feels really specific. It's probably here in where I live in Minneapolis area. And same with people. If we have a picture of the actual person, then it connects them to the characters. These were actual people. Like Jesse Ventura. Can I show a childhood photo? He feels real now. There he is with his dad. That's the only photo we could get of his dad. So it helped me and all of us to try to say, like, even if we can't get much, if we can get that much, he was a child once. He felt safe with his dad, as a young person, gets us to invest in that character. This is a space I love to play in. And if Daniel were on this call, he would say I maybe do it too much. I love using shots that aren't the right ones, but feel like they were. And Leia's going to talk about this too a little bit. There's a amazing resource called the Prelinger Archive, which has like all these bizarre like educational films and government films and all kinds of stuff from like the 40s and 50s. It's amazing. And what's great about them is one, they're in the public domain. They are free to use. Nobody is holding copyright on them. But two, they're full of just amazing, great black and white, often film shots of people doing things that maybe is hard to find. Shots that people operating equipment that you can't get anymore, uh, and or people walking around in costumes that it'd be weird to try to do it some other way. And so I'm going to show a clip in a moment of of a scene that's about a very specific thing, and I don't have any shots of that specific thing. So I use these kind of generic period shots, and I think it totally works. It's one of my favorites. Without really ever, I think there's like 2 shots that are actually about the thing. Everything else is other things. I'm not going to show this one right now, but I did a documentary on cemeteries a few years back. And what was fun about that one was um, trying to kind of invoke or evoke this universal experience of death, of losing loved ones, and then memorializing them, coming to visit the graves and the cemetery. And what was amazing is I found in this Prelinger archive so many home videos of people going to visit gravestones, because people do that. People still do that. My family does that. And so there was these amazing footage of I don't know whom visiting their loved ones back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And I was able to sprinkle that into this cemetery show along with kind of contemporary footage of that place or these cemeteries, in a way that made it really helped with that universality. That one might look like it's in London, that one looks like it's in New York, but it didn't matter. Like my point was that this was an experience we all share, and that in that case, the universality of it was the value. So here's a use of kind of, again, if public domain ephemeral films to that effect. I hope. There we go. And this was a show about the computing industry in Minnesota at the time. So you'll see what a weird pivot it is. Oh, dang it. Sorry. I apologize. Can I get it back? Yes, okay.
The origins of Honeywell as a computer manufacturer stretch way, way, way back to the late 19th century. There were 2 different firms, one in Indiana and one here, that were involved with stoves. Coal stoves needed to have their air adjusted. So Honeywell, and the firm that was in the Twin Cities, figured out a way essentially of making an on-off switch that would be temperature regulated, what we would call a thermostat. Now, in the 1920s, those 2 firms were combined and became something of a force for control systems. During the Second World War, like many companies, Honeywell was very heavily involved in the military economy. So they worked on things like the Norden bomb sight. It was kind of an analog computer. And in the 1950s, ended up moving more firmly into the military market on top of its market in heating controls. They started up joint ventures with people in the Massachusetts area and tried to figure out ways of building big room-sized computers.
So there was like really 2 shots. There was a shot of the side of the Honeywell building that said Minneapolis Regulator or something like that. That was a contemporary shot that the editor then made not widescreen and made black and white and added noise. And then there was a shot of I think women working with the Honeywell thermostats that are often still found in houses. Everything else was from like people parading in hats and women clocking out of and the shots of the stove. None of that had anything to do with Honeywell, I don't think. It was just stuff that I found, and it was so representational of the feel of it more than the facts of it, if that makes sense. It was more important to me that people thought, that is so cool that you can get cutting edge computing out of this need to regulate stove temperature and airflow. That was way more important to me than finding a Honeywell photo from, 1970 or whatever, like immaterial. Way cooler to just have people experience, like you could go from, this Edwardian almost era to, bombers and stuff. None of that had anything to do directly with Honeywell, but it worked. So anyway, a fun example of trying to evoke a feeling over the factual nature of what I'm trying to communicate. And I think it's more effective. And then we get into this area of B-roll where it doesn't exist. This is a tragic one, but when a child is killed, the news camera people will often, get a shot of a empty swing on a playground, kind of swinging a little bit, or, that kind of stuff, trying to show what's missing. This is a real challenge for us as storytellers. How do we depict abstract things or intangible things? Leia and I worked on 5 episodes on childhood trauma. Really difficult to visualize that. So things like mental health or trauma or things that didn't happen. This happens all the time. I almost, took this job. I almost moved to this place, but then I didn't. How do you depict things that didn't happen? So these are interesting challenges for us as storytellers and for you. And it's an opportunity to get creative. They have those shots of like the sun setting with a bird flying through for a reason. They have the shot of the coffee mug on the table. Like, you have to get creative sometimes. So be experimental, have some fun, try to figure out what works. And then my only last advice is don't be so clever that you lose people. You can do something really clever and interesting, and then people just get stuck on what are they looking at, and they stop listening and they tune out. So, but I would encourage you to see where that line is. Test it with your friends. Try something and see if people can follow it. If they go, wow, you lost me with the, whatever it is you tried. But be brave, try some stuff. And then sometimes it's the choice to not use B-roll at all. I have made videos. I did one for a kind of a senior care center, and they were just telling their stories about, life in the senior, and there was no B-roll. It didn't work to film with these older folks. So it was a talking head video, but it was so compelling that nobody cared because the stories were so interesting. So it can be done. If told well, it's a great practice for you as a storyteller. Is it possible to tell a story without B-roll? Theater of the mind is powerful, and so you can let people imagine it. Sometimes showing a thing is actually worse than letting people invent their own version of it. So the clip I'm going to show now, this is a legendary local journalist in the Twin Cities who early in his career here had a drinking problem and got drunk and then went on air. And the whole time we'd heard this story because we interviewed him early on. And at the same time, we're hunting through all this footage we got access to of evening news. And we kind of zeroed in on the time, the year, the month, maybe the month of when this would have been. And the question we kept asking ourselves is, are we going to show it if we find it? If we find the night that he, on record where he was drunk on air, do we want to show it? It certainly would tell the story, but is it almost better to let people have their own version in their head? And so what we ended up doing was we found a clip where we all thought he probably has been drinking. It's not the night that he's talking about, but it's like a week or two from that, before that. And we used it before he tells the story, which I think was an interesting choice. So it's not a kind of that say, he says he was drunk on air, and then we show the clip. We show the clip with no context, as you'll see, and then you can kind of conclude for yourself, was he drunk? Was he not drunk? But we spend the rest of the time with him telling that story. So at the risk of spoiling it, here is that.
No, I was going to go to.
11% across the board pay hike is in store for the Stokely Van Camp workers who have been on strike.
I made the error of being drunk on the air in 1980, and a million people watched my crisis. And Ron Handberg, who loves me, was livid. Usually you would get fired for doing that. But the law had recently changed where alcoholism and chemical dependency was considered a disability. And you couldn't fire someone. You had to offer them treatment. And I don't think he was very pleased with that. He said, "Will you therefore go to treatment on our dime and get sober?" And I said, "Can I have a couple of days to think about it?" I could get another job, but I couldn't get another companion that would take the pain out of my life like alcohol had done.
I was hurting because I was taking all these pills.
So that's that, which I thought worked really well. Instead of say it, see it, it was a kind of awkward moment that goes into the story, and then we just let him tell the story. We don't go back to that footage. I thought that was very effective. And it's a great example of sometimes you just don't have the B-roll, in which case you could do it that way too. But again, sometimes B-roll can be a distraction, can take you out of the moment. This is my advice. Leia, I would love to hear if you have a similar take or if yours completely different. This is how I work, which is I always feel like I don't have all the shots I need. So I first cover with whatever I have, and it's not usually great. But my challenge to myself is can I at least cover the edits? Can I at least hide, the sausage making activity with something? So I put in what I have, if it's good enough, and then I go, okay, that helps me understand what's missing. And then I can go, oh, okay, well, this could work here, but here she's talking about going to that synagogue. Let me find a shot of that synagogue. It kind of helps you, or helps me anyway, see what you have, helps you prioritize, helps you figure out, that'll do. I don't love that shot. If I can't find anything else, fine. But, I would like to come back to it. You can make markers, come back, revisit this, replace if we can. If you have a team or anybody helping you find stuff, it means you can be really specific. Hey, great news about that section. Now I'm down to these 4 shots that I need. That helps anybody else who's helping be focused and finding those things. Replace the worst shots first, the ones you just despise, get those out of there. Maybe they belong better somewhere else and they've been liberated to fit somewhere else, or maybe they're just awful, low res, whatever. If possible, don't be satisfied with your first pass. If you have the time and you can put in the time, this was a lesson I learned well. This is slightly embarrassing. When I was in high school, I tried writing poetry. I took a poetry class and it was a lot of fun, but I was kind of this, mind that, I had this inspired moment and these words came to me and I wrote them down and isn't it beautiful? And, it's kind of more mystical approach. And I thought I was cool. And then my, my teacher was like, no, it's work. You work on it. It gets better the more you work on it. It doesn't fall out of the heavens done. Sometimes there are inspired ideas by all means. But no, it just gets better through work. And so being disabused of this idea that something you wake up from a dream and it's all solved. Nope, you just keep working on it. So, and this concept of it being iterative, that it's iterations, you work on it, you work all the way through it, you're feeling good, just take a couple days off, come back to it, watch it again, go, oh God, that's not nearly as good as I thought it was. Okay. And it helps you focus. You have to, pace yourself. But it gets better the more time you put into it. Sometimes there just aren't more images. Sometimes, like that Jesse Ventura's dad, that's all there were. That's all that we could get a hold of. So sometimes that's what you just got to make the one picture work somehow. But often there are, if you hunt. In fact, for this most recent broadcast TV one, there's a gorgeous headline that I just found. We published it. We exported a couple weeks ago. I just found some articles that one of our people found that would have been perfect in the show that I never saw. We were just all so busy. So the irony of finding stuff after the fact, that it was like, oh, I wish we could have put that in. It was so great. Oh well. And then, film or moving pictures usually is better than stills insofar as it chews up time better. Because the picture changes, you can use it longer. If you stayed on a shot for 10 seconds and it's moving and interesting, that's cool. If you stayed on a photo for 10 seconds, that's a really long time. So, but it's not always that. Stills are amazing. Stills sometimes can say something that, film and video just can't do. It gives you that moment in time. So, user instincts. I won't talk a lot about visual effects because that's kind of advanced. I developed some skills in this that I don't think is commonplace or expected that most producers have. I just in my previous career did a lot more of this, and so I have some background. But it can be as simple as just putting moves on photos in Premiere or whatever you're using. There's usually good tools for just a little gentle push or pan or something. And that can just bring pictures to life. It can help just with pacing, just keep things moving. The other way that it can be helpful is when things are difficult to visualize or depict. Again, in this computer industry, somebody was talking about an increased use of data over the course of decades, and I wanted to tell that in a cool way, but not a complex way. So here is a clip with some really fairly simple animation that helped to tell a complex technological point.
For years, we produced a few billion disk drives, and those drives could store a few zettabytes of data, and a zettabyte is 1 followed by 21 zeros worth of data. It's a huge amount of data, but it kind of pales in comparison with what's happening over the next 5 to 10 years, where we're expecting to see a 10x increase over the next 5 to 10 years compared with what happened in the last 40 years.
So again, not really actually that complex. It was just a shape that we revealed the shape and kind of zoomed the camera out in After Effects. But you could, it doesn't have to even be moving. It could just, and of course, that's not like statistically, I'm sure it varied quite a bit. It's not that linear. But anyway, the point was I wanted to make sure people understood what 10 times means, that in 1 decade it's going to need a 10-fold increase over what was in the last 50 years or 40 years. I thought that helped visually instead of just saying it, which we could have done. One thing I've learned is if you're going to do it, you have to do it 3 times. This is kind of a joke. I would imagine in the industry, certainly in our place. If you do it once, it's an accident. If you do it twice, it's weird. If you do it 3 times, it's a style. You totally meant to do it, and people expect it. And then when they do it, when they see it the next 2 times, they won't be surprised. I'm a fan of tying real world things in. So if you're going to do a move across a photo, maybe it's got paper texture. Maybe it's, flying over old maps. Maybe it's schematics. I was using schematics in the background on some stuff for the broadcast news one. Don't be too clever. This is another caution where just I'm ambitious. I try things. I try too many things. My boss is always like, let's dial it back. I'm trying to push to make more interesting things, and the cost of that is it pulls people out of the story because they're like, what am I looking at? This is weird. I didn't follow, or I'm distracted by the shiny things. And to this point, this broadcast news one, I had tons of animations that I had dreamt of from the moment we started. As soon as I heard going from the creation of microwave news trucks where you could beam the signal back to the station, and then the introduction of mobile satellite. I had all these cool animations with, 70s vans and all this stuff, and all of them came out, even though I had them all totally dialed in and mocked up, and they look great. And nobody said, I hate that. It was just eventually we're like, we don't really need them. Like, we can just show the photo of the microwave truck and the satellite truck, and we don't actually need the cool kind of schematic thing. So that was a lesson for me, and I fought it a bit. And then I was like, no, I need to listen to my team here, that it pulls you out of the moment to look at this constructed artificial thing instead of just looking at more pictures from the period. Sound design is an area where and we're blessed to have really gifted editors and audio post-production people who can often spend time on this. So I was able to have that. But I often will find sound effects that I like and put them in, even if I don't expect them to persist, because they would like something here. And that gives them, anybody who sees it can go, oh, I see what you're doing. And maybe we'll find a better sound. They should be subtle. Rarely do you, unless you're really trying to make a point, do you want something to just take over. I think they should be more about a feeling than about the fact of the moment. So it's not what it is, it's what it sounds like. In the case of that broadcast show, people were changing these old TV sets and going click, click, click through the stations. And we hadn't recorded it with good sound when we filmed it. And so I went to look through some sound effects, and there was this car gear shift that was like clunk, and it sounded great. And so that's what I put in. I think that's what made it all the way through the show. But it was just such a nice, beefy clunking sound that it said more than if we had found an actual click and it went click, that would not have been satisfying. And so this is what I've always said too about, sets and what's behind people in when you film with them. It's not what it is, it's what it looks like on TV, or in this case, what it sounds like. So it's an area to be playful if you have the luxury of the time. There's some terms that are helpful. Sometimes you just want, if you're showing a road, showing a building, and a car drives past, if you have the recorded sound and it's clean, great, use it. Otherwise, there might be what they usually call ambience, which might be a street scene and hear people walking and birds chirping. And so again, if you don't have it recorded, ambience is a great way to kind of just get the feel of a place, an indoor or outdoor place. Walla is a term that means lots of people talking in a kind of incoherent way, like you can't pick out conversation. So you're showing a busy bar because that's part of your story, and you need bar walla. So you find library sound effects, and there's a sound of people laughing and glasses clinking a little bit. And they've recorded just about anything you can think of. And then Foley, if you don't know, is a category of kind of human action sounds. So footsteps or somebody jingling their keys, trying to get into a lock, opening a door. That stuff is usually called Foley, kind of human body sounds, being made in an environment. Running on grass, walking upstairs, high heels, all kinds of different sounds. So walla is a word, as far as I know, that's the only way it gets used, is to describe that kind of indistinct speaking, but it can be very useful. So here's an example that I used recently. And again, much more about how it feels than the fact of it.
I'll handle it the way Paul Douglas handled it.
Nick Coleman had written a media column for the Star Tribune for quite a while. If the crowd might have gotten restless or annoyed with me tweaking them about their haircuts, Nick would eviscerate them.
When I got here in 1983, Nick Coleman called me Weather Boy, and it made me furious, calling me Weather Boy.
Don Shelby is a very odd-looking duck. I am quoting on this.
I do the weather for free. They pay me.
So I don't know if those came through, but it was like sword stabbing sounds that I put in when they're describing being critiqued by the newspaper columnists. And I put it in, and I honestly didn't think people were, that the powers that be would let me keep it in, but it made the point and everybody liked it. So I actually originally put in the finish him sound from not Street Fighter. Anyway, that one didn't last very long, but it was that was fun, and it said more than I thought I'd be able to. So that was kind of fun. There are tons of libraries on the internet. A lot of them want you to pay. I know you're young and poor, and that's probably not a great option. There are some free stuff out there. Make sure you're not getting into anything nefarious or scams. YouTube has a surprising number of sound effects where people will say, you have my permission to use this, so check that out. And then my suggestion is, if it's something you think you can make, if you hear it in your head, see if you can figure out how to record it. I mean, you can record on your phone with the little, the voice memo thing or whatever. give it a try. What's the worst? And then you don't have any rights issues. It's your own sound. You can use it in the future. You can lend it to your friends. It might be kind of fun. And it also, again, if you've ever seen videos of people doing Foley work, it's never what it looks like. It's what it sounds like. So breaking a bone is like they take celery and crack it. Like it's interesting and fascinating to see how they figure out how to make it sound like our brain wants it to sound. So that can be a fun exercise for you if you have the time and the wherewithal. I'm going to hurry because I know Leia is excited to talk and I'm taking longer than I thought I would. Just a couple of like big picture things here so you don't get lost on your journey. It is okay to not use an interview. You lined up an interview, you went and talked to somebody, they weren't awesome, they were having a bad day, they couldn't get their words out right, they didn't say what you hoped they'd say. It's okay not to use it. Don't promise everybody that they'll make it in, and then that it's your show. So, it's okay to not use it, even if you worked hard to get it. Sometimes if you can find one line just to make people feel good, then that can be cool. But one of the projects, the computer history they were all really old, almost entirely like 80s and 90s, because they'd been from the way, way back. And one lady came in and she was in her, I think, early 90s, and she was not like cognitively doing great. She was, she did her best. And I went back later thinking, oh, she just didn't say anything good. And I found some real gems, but only after I'd kind of let go of that I needed to get something out of her. Then I found some stuff that really worked, and then I felt really good putting her in. But again, it's your show. You haven't signed anything saying people are going to be in it. This is a really important one. Don't let great be the enemy of good. And don't point out your faults. I learned this in woodworking. I make things, and the first thing I do is I show my wife the part that I messed up. And the woodworking community is like, no, they won't notice if you don't point it out. There was a Chinese proverb: better a flawed diamond than a perfect pebble. You worked on it. You made it as good as you could. It's awesome. Perfection is unattainable, so don't even worry about it. Do your best. This is a super helpful one that one of my editors, has helped us do when we have trouble figuring out what goes into a show and what is fun but ultimately not important, is to write a rubric sentence. That is, write a kind of a log line of what your show is about. And then if you have a question of whether it fits, you read the log line out loud, and then you go, oh, well, I guess that's cool, but it's not really about what the show is about. So it's cool. Maybe we'll keep it over here in case there's extra time. But when push comes to shove, you got to make decisions. It's helpful to have a thing that says it's either in or out. So that can be really helpful. Don't let small details drive the bigger story. Keep the big picture in your head. Don't get so focused on the little stuff. This is more tactical, but duplicate your sequences and save frequently. Every few days when I'm offlining, I'm making a new version, just because someday you go back and go, oh, I deleted that one line by that one person and I wish I had it back and I don't know how to find it. That's a great way to do it. Good transitions are really hard. I've been making these for years and years and years, and they're still hard. And each project is different. Sometimes you're transitioning from something really happy to something really sad or serious. It's hard. So practice, get used to it. But it's a whole art form. On one hand, trust your audience. They're smarter than you think. They can follow you on sometimes when you're turning left or turning right in your storytelling. And don't trust your audience. They're idiots. Sometimes we have to lead them by the hand. Sometimes we have to make it really obvious. I have a tendency of trusting my audience too much. And then I am helped by my team to say, I don't think anybody's going to follow you the way you're doing that. So it's a both and, I think. And this is where getting other people's opinions is helpful. Never fall too deeply in love with an idea. I do this all the time. I fall madly in love with my own ideas, and then people don't get them. They don't translate. It doesn't work as well as I thought. Everybody loves it but one person, and we need that person's buy-in. Whatever. They're ideas. You'll have others. Don't die on that hill. And especially in a collaborative environment, because those are people testing the value of your idea. So it's an important process. They're not attacking you. And you're going to kill a lot of really great ideas, so get used to that. This is the killing your darlings part. It's going to happen. You have amazing ideas and they just don't work. And so the more you get used to that, the better off you'll be. I think this is my last one. At some point, you'll lose objectivity. You will not know which way is up from down. You have watched this thing so many times that you don't have a sense of it anymore. And this is where having trusted folks watch it along the way, ideally, maybe some of the same people, so they can see it progress and they can see it change and improve, or they can remember, oh, I wish you hadn't cut that part out because I really did really like that. Just because something works for you doesn't mean it works. This, again, happens to me all the time. Uh, I just had this brilliant thing and I show it to somebody and they go, what? Because my brain was able to do some gymnastics that most people can't. So that I need that check. This is a huge one, I think, for anybody. What implicit biases do you have? What are you assuming coming into this story that everybody's going to think or know or see a situation or a story a particular way? And your audience may go, why would you assume that? So check your own implicit biases about all kinds of things. Certainly anything, cultural, is a great place to start, and just a good thing to do for yourself anyway. Resist editorializing. And this is where maybe more likely to be in a narration situation. Let this story kind of tell its own moral arc. You rarely need to paint somebody as a bad guy or good guy. Hopefully the story kind of does that for you. So try not to put too much of your own editorializing into that. And then lastly, you're never done. It's never done. My dad was a producer and he used to say, you're never done. They just pry it out of your hands because you have to be done to move on to something else. So it's okay. Yes, if you work on it for another week, it'd be better, but sometimes you just got to be done. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to Leia.
Hello, everyone. Let me get my sharing screen together. Hi, everyone. My name is Leya Hale. I come from the Dakota and Diné nations. I'm a producer at Twin Cities PBS, and I've been producing there for a little over 12 years. I really focus on history documentaries, but I also do a variety of short form content as well. So thank you all for joining. And that was an excellent presentation by my colleague. Thank you, Kevin, for setting that up. So I just wanted to emphasize that there's no right or wrong way to make a film or a video project. Definitely there's those 3 production stages, the pre-production, production, and post-production. But I know for me, sometimes it's always hard and difficult to start in the pre-production process when it comes to, writing down your ideas, trying to brainstorm what you want your topic to be on, what subjects you want to involve. So for me, where I get my inspiration from is I kind of dive a little bit further down in the process. What I really like to do to get my, creativity going is I start listening to music. Maybe some may think that the music part of this happens, at pre-production, once you kind of got a full timeline sketched out already, then you start searching for music. But for me, I find it more beneficial when I edit to music. So what I do is before I even start, I kind of have an idea of what my topic is, kind of an umbrella idea. But what I like to do is I like listening to music. I feel like when I listen to music, it's really inspiring and it helps me to start brainstorming and thinking of scenes, starting thinking of the feelings I want to evoke for my audiences to feel. So there's a variety of things that you can do when it comes to searching for music. There's all kinds of online free databases that you could use. Right here, I put an example from Pixabay, I believe it's called, where you can also find free downloadable online music to use from, where they're royalty free, where you could, use it in all kinds of and it's also what's nice about these online databases is they're searchable. So you can probably even search in like themes or, maybe if like, your topic is going to be about action but for me, I always like to utilize local artists. That's one of my favorite part about just my process. Sometimes I will search out some of my favorite local artists, and I have a tip here too if you choose to go that direction. I usually like to find musicians that have a large body of work because then I'm able to, select multiple tracks and highlight their music throughout the entire video or film that you're creating. So I think it's a unique way to, feature local artists as well. But maybe it could be a friend of yours that's a musician that you would like to feature. Maybe it's someone that's more established and that it may require, some funding for you to pay them to use their music. But that's just something that I like to do early on to get my brain going. I really like to just, already start thinking about, oh, this music I'm going to use, or this specific track I want to use for the climax, or this one I want to use for the ordinary world to set up who the characters are. So I already start. I even like will make a playlist. Like say for instance, there's a musician I'm highlighting, and I'll make a YouTube playlist of all of their work. And then I'll just listen to it over and over, driving my kids to school, when I'm taking a shower. I just really like that inspiration that I hear from music. So that's kind of how I begin my process, is to get my creativity going through music. Then this is also a little bit working backwards, is I know how Kevin had mentioned that, he tries to utilize work with visuals that he has. But for me, before I even begin, figuring out who I'm going to interview, what B-roll I'm going to use or what filmed B-roll I'm going to use, I already start casting a wide net online in regards to gathering. I almost like start gathering as much footage as I can pertaining to that topic that I'm going to highlight. So for instance, I'm currently working on a history basketball documentary. So I already started just to kind of get that process going and to see what's out there already, online. I'll start looking, at my local historical society. That's the Minnesota Historical Society here. They have online databases at your local libraries. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one because
we lost your sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
I can hear you, Leia, but your slides aren't changing.
Oh, they're not?
At least I'm not to me.
How about now? Let me try one more time. Do you see them now?
Looks like you unshared. Sorry.
I am going to try and do this once again. Do you see anything now?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for letting me know. So do you see this B-roll source page now?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So like I was saying, I cast this wide net early on to try and figure out what sources do I have available to me. And then that will also help me, dwindle down my ideas, because I will know, oh, I found these specific shots that I really want to use, or these specific newspaper headlines. So I think it helps with the process of narrowing it down early on, instead of kind of leaving it towards the end where you're kind of just like, okay, I've put everything on a timeline. I have all my talking heads. I have a little bit of B-roll, but now what do I do? But I feel like when I do this early on, it's really helpful with me being more focused on what I want to show visually to tell the story. So these are just some B-roll sources that I definitely use a lot. Some government archives is the Library of Congress, the U.S. National Archives, and these are all online, and most of them are downloadable. And when it comes to government archives, most of the time they're in the public domain, meaning anything that was created by the government at one point is free for the public to use. And this other one called DVIDs, it's a military database that has, anything related to the military. These are also a list of royalty-free sites that I go to often. Kevin had mentioned Prelinger Archive. That's something that I definitely use when it comes to trying to illustrate and display, historical images. And then these are also just some free online, searchable, downloadable, royalty-free footage that you can find as well. So then once I kind of have an idea of, the topic, I have my music, I have already visuals selected, like historical, I have a folder of historical images, I have a folder of modern, stills, even if I found like possible drawings or paintings, even like text, when it comes to historical documents. I kind of have all of those organized. And then I start figuring out, now I want to start figuring out how do I tell my story. So, it's a big process when you're trying to produce like a feature-length documentary. But when it comes to short form, the basic 3-act story setup is kind of my go-to. I usually work in an outline form. I really focus on the 3 acts. I normally start with the first act, what is the topic? How do I set up? How do I, I'm already thinking, who do I want to be the expert, or what character do I want to tell the story, but through maybe their personal story? So I'm already figuring out, how am I going to introduce my subject? How am I going to introduce the topic or issue that you're highlighting? So all of that comes in the first act. So it's answering those questions: who, what, and why. Why is what you're focusing on important? That kind of comes, those sound bites, those interview sound bites are kind of like the first part. Then the second act, I call it the conflict. I think this is a part where when you're telling a story, it's not really a story until you kind of frame it as the story arc. There has to be some type of a change, whether it's a person that changed over time or it's an issue that changed over time. There kind of has to be like this arc that happens. To me, I think those are the basic fundamentals of creating a story. Because if you have just a topic and then a resolution and no conflict in the middle, then it doesn't really make sense. So to me, I always think that you always have to put in that confrontation in the second act. So those are sound bites of, say for instance, whatever issue that you're talking about, there's always some type of a friction, a challenge. Maybe it's somebody that needs to overcome a challenge. Maybe it's women's rights. And then all of a sudden, there's a point in history where something is making it challenging for whatever issue that you're talking about to to exist or to occur or to grow. So you always have to like focus on that, what is making it hard, what is pushing, what is making it difficult for your character or the issue at hand. What is the challenge that it needs to overcome? So then the third act is what I call the resolution. That's the sound bites. Those are the visuals that you're kind of wrapping up the story, and you're wrapping it up by talking about, how is the issue being resolved? What steps are being taken to overcome this? Because a lot of the times when we talk about, social-based issue type topics, such as, MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women, something that I did a documentary on. Sometimes these issues, they can't be solved overnight. especially with your film. You know, your film can't solve issues, but they can bring attention to it. You can bring awareness to it. But in that resolution, you highlight the efforts that are going on to address it, to overcome it, you know. So sometimes you don't have the ending all, you know, nicely ended with the bow. You know, sometimes you have to talk about those ongoing efforts that people are doing to help address whatever issue that you're speaking of, or maybe it's character based and you're seeing that person overcome their challenge by doing, you know, X, Y, and Z. So those are kind of like the main story blocks that I like to figure out way before I start getting, you know, a camera ready and interviewing people. To me, I think it's really important to have a plan in place, because if you just go out there with no plan and you have a camera, it's very difficult to figure out, what do I ask the person, you know. It's really difficult if you don't have a plan. So when it comes to more of the pre-production process, so once I have my story structure in place, that's when I start figuring out, what questions am I going to ask my interviewees. So because I have this arc, you know, this story structure, that's how I come up with my questions. I make sure that I'm asking questions that are going to address the first act, second act, and third act. And definitely a tip, I always make sure to tell people, you know, try not to ask yes or no questions. You want to make sure that you're drawing, you know, story. So asking questions like, can you tell me about this? You know, so it leads the interviewee to want to tell more of the information. And then when it comes to, you know, trying to figure out, how am I visually going to start telling these stories? Because like what Kevin had mentioned, there's all kinds of cuts going on because we're doing our best to, you know, dwindle down maybe an hour-long video. And what if your video was 5 to 8 minutes? So you want to get the best of the best out of that interview, all of the best sound bites. But then so there's going to be all these different jump cuts. So you want to make sure you're thinking and planning ahead. What could I do in regards to visual? So then that's where your B-roll shot list come into play. Almost thinking about scenes. One thing that I like to do also is, if there's not an actual I guess you could say B-roll of something, but say I wanted to talk about native spirituality. Some things I like to do is like, I burn sage and maybe I want to get a nice close-up of the sage burning and the smoke coming from, and then I would place that over, you know, when maybe I'm focusing on a story of Indigenous culture and they're talking about, you know, spirituality. So sometimes I will stage things to help me evoke emotion. And maybe it's something, an object that you have well lit, and then you're just filming that in slow-mo. So you're trying to just figure out creative ways to tell your story if you don't have the option, you know, to find something online. Or also when it comes to you know, filming B-roll, and we'll get to that in the next slide. Another tip that I like to tell people is I really over research. So say for instance, I want to interview somebody specific and I know maybe they're a well-known, you know, teacher or professor. I will look up everything that I can possible of them that is online. So I'll read stuff that they wrote. You know, a lot of times when you're interviewing like well-known, you know, speakers, they might have a TED Talk, or they might have something online that shows them already recorded. So I start listening to things that are pre-recorded online of individuals, and I'll get interview questions and ideas from that as well. And then you also get a sense of their interview, how they communicate. You know, sometimes people are really, they're really big on hand motions. Sometimes people are really quiet, you know. So you want to really almost learn people's interview styles, so it helps you prepare for your interview as well. When it comes to the production process, I know we're not, especially if we're kind of in that early beginning stage, we don't have access, to a full crew that gets assigned to us and everything like that. So I always tell people, sometimes it's best to just go and ask help from people that kind of already possess this knowledge. So I would say, a lot of there's always all kinds of local video production training programs in your communities that maybe you can go and ask for some help. There's your local cable access. I think here in the Twin Cities, ours is called Speak Minneapolis. There's also Experience Friends that you can go to, online message boards. I know on Facebook, and here in the Minnesota area, there's a group that is people just kind of say, oh, I need a DP, or I need an audio tech, and then people will answer it. So there's just all kinds of ways for you to not feel pressured that you have to do this on your own, but make sure that it's always good to make sure that you find somebody to work with that could that already possess that knowledge, that can help you get some good quality video and audio. And I always say it's best to start with the interviews first. I call it, it's called A-roll. So you know how like when you're looking on a sequence in Premiere Pro, and then there's the video track number one, that is what we consider A-roll. Those are the talking heads. That's the foundation of what you build upon. Then B-roll is the supplementary visuals that then you place on top. So I think it's always best to start with your A-roll first and build a solid foundation before you start trying to figure out how am I going to cover this visually. So I'm not the best at equipment. I'm a producer. I really enjoy the story process, and I also enjoy the editing process. So I'm not the best at when it comes to explaining, things like audio. But one thing that I know for sure, that it's always best to use an external audio, because when you rely just on your built-in audio on the camera, it's not the best. You can kind of already tell when you hear right away that you didn't use an external audio. So when it comes to external audio devices, those could be a shotgun mic. If you see on this picture, there's a shotgun mic that's connected to the boom pole. You can see this gentleman clipping a lavalier mic on the shirt of the person. So you try to use external outside from the camera that either you can connect to the camera to record it, or if you're advanced, you can use a whole separate audio recording system, like a Zoom recorder. But you want to always make sure that you get good audio no matter what it is, because to me, I've heard over and over that audio is most important, even more than video, when it comes to capturing an important interview. And one little tip I always like to include is don't use movable chairs. Like, make sure you don't use a swivel chair, because when you're interviewing somebody, especially when I get interviewed, I get nervous. And then if I'm in a chair that moves or rocks, I'm gonna be really like, and then because of nerds, you just don't even know you're doing these things. So sometimes like you don't want a creaky chair, or you don't want somebody to have the ability to move around. So it's always nice to use a nice sturdy chair. So when it comes to basic lighting, if you're at the beginning stages and you don't know too much about lighting, I say find a window, try to use basic natural light when it comes to placing your subject near a window, so you can cast that, maybe a light coming in to show the side of your face. But if you're a little more advanced, there's the 3-point lighting system that a lot of people rely on, which is 3 lighting systems. Your key light, that's on 45-degree angle, that shows part of your face. There's a fill light that can also be supplemented with like a reflector on the other side to kind of make sure that it's not too shadowy right here. And then there's the backlight. Sometimes people will just put like a lamp in the back, just to kind of provide like that depth of field. So if you're a beginner, you can definitely rely on natural light from a window, place your interview subject close to a window so that natural light could hit their face. Or if you're more advanced, you could definitely Google and learn more about the 3-point lighting system. So like Kevin had mentioned, organization is very important, mainly because it helps you not get lost. If you're just kind of, especially if you're working on this daily and you don't properly organize where things are, then it's just like, it becomes chaotic. You're like, where's this footage or where's this thing at? And it's just always nice to be organized and have a system that you can easily find, your footage. And then when it comes to you uploaded your video files and your audio into Premiere Pro or whatever editing system you're using. If you were advanced enough and you have two files, a video file and a audio file, it's always best to make sure that you sync those files early on, just to make sure that you have the original synced properly. But if you're using, just a basic setup where it's the camera and then you just have an external audio connected to the camera, then that should be much easier where you don't have to worry about syncing the audio with the video. When it comes to editing interviews, one thing when it comes to just basic, I guess you could say editing, I like to start with the interviews, the A-roll, the main foundation that I'm gonna build upon. So what I like to do is I create a separate sequence for each interview, just like my process is very similar to Kevin's. I like to color code early on. So if you see in this background image, these are 3 separate interviews. They're all different colors. And I really like to, just make sure that they all have their same color, because once I start dwindling down the sound bites and then I start laying them across my sequence and start building a story, I could visually see that it's balanced, that if maybe if there's too much red, then I will know, oh, that person has too much time and this person that's green doesn't have enough time. So then it helps me just to make sure that the voices are balanced. And then one thing that I like to do early on is when I do my first sequence, I will clean it up when it comes to the interview. I will remove my questions as a producer. I will remove those. I will take out all of the ums and ahs and pauses. To me, I don't really like listening to my own self speak, because I know that I do a lot of that, that extra ums, ahs, and almost like laugh. So I will do my best to take all of that out, because I think it's more straightforward. It's more, cleaner when it's just you got the best of the best in there. So one thing that Kevin talked about was markers. I love the markers. You could right click, or actually it's just the short cut is M. There's a little marker that goes on top of your sequence, and you have the ability to drag its duration out. You also have the ability to color code those two as well. So I think long ago when we used to have, I remember when I first started, we used to use SD cams, I believe, where it had the ability to record both the audio and the video together. And when I imported it, it was clips, like a variety of clips. And that was a longer process because I had to go and label each clip. I would label it like wide shot, establishing shot, close up, blah, 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 or whatever it is. But nowadays, we like to put things on one timeline, one sequence, and then instead of having to go through a whole bunch of different audio clips, It's all laid on one sequence. And then I use those markers and I put on top, you know, if it's B-roll, the same thing applies to the B-roll sequences too. You would put like exterior shot of building, if that's what it is, or you would say, you know, close up of a clock, you know, so so you could visually see things quicker. So that's what I like to do with my interviews, especially. I will do topics, I will do introduction, I will do, you know, whatever they're talking about, I will stretch it and make sure that I'm properly labeling things so I can, you know, find things quicker. So Kevin also talked about duplicating the sequence. That's something that I do very often. I will start with the one main one that I cleaned up, and then I'll duplicate that. So say for instance, when I did my very first cleanup of an interview, it's like 30 minutes. And then the next time I will work on it, I will duplicate that, and then I'll go through it and pass, and then I'll start taking out things like, you know, redundancy, or, you know, when people speak, they may speak about something, but then they will repeat it again, and then it sounds much better, like maybe the second time they said it. So then I will start what we call selecting our sound bites. So then I'll start, you know, dwindling it down more. So maybe my second sequence of one interview is maybe like it's 20 minutes now. So then all of a sudden I would be like, okay, now because my initial video is going to be only 5 minutes, let's make another duplicate of it, of that 20-minute. Let's make a third duplicate. So now I'm really gonna be nitpicky, and I want to make sure that I'm getting specific sound bites that I know are gonna work for Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. So then I'll make that next duplicate, and then now maybe I dwindled it down to 10 minutes. So I'm still keeping those markers on top so it's easy to find. And I just keep, you know, almost like sculpting it. You know, you're like shaving down all the information to the best of the best. So the duplication is just a lifesaver too, because if you're like, oh, I remember, you know, so-and-so said something, and now I found the perfect spot for that. But then I'm all, but I deleted that a long time ago. Then you just go back to your duplications and then you find it. So it's easy to almost like save your work, you know, when you're duplicating things. And then I would say do the same thing for B-roll when you create your B-roll sequences. So that was really fast. I wanted to share a video. So this is sorry, it's the wrong video. This is a trailer for one of my last features. It's called The Electric Indian. And this just gives you an example of how I use some archival footage. And so in my film, it's about a well-known hockey player, the late Henry Boucher, who was an Ojibwe professional hockey player, and it kind of tells his life story. But I'm just gonna play the trailer because I want to show how I utilize, you know, archival footage with modern B-roll, with sit-down interviews, along with even like newspaper headlines. So let's go ahead and let me play the.
It's unbelievable the way things happen. It's been a long road. I remember vividly the sounds of skating on fresh ice.
Henry, he could take that puck and he would go all over the rink with it and nobody could touch him.
We were pretty fortunate to be a young kid in Warroad with so many players that were so good.
Since the inception of hockey in Warroad, one of the neat marriages is that the local community had a lot of natives, so the natives play and are welcomed.
They talk about the great ones. You don't have to say Henry Boucher. You can just start with Henry.
Man, you just can't grab those emotions that you had with the community and the pride and the joy.
When he would get the puck, the whole crowd would stand up.
Those of us who are involved with hockey dream and aspire to do some of the things that Henry got to do with his incredible talent.
Ahern on a pass to Boucher in the right side, a slap shot.
Henry Boucher was referred to as the Electric Indian because.
So that's just an example, and I believe we were at time.
Yes, but thank you so much. Okay, well, that was wonderful. You were both really wonderful. Thank you so much for being here.
I need to apologize for Leia for talking so long. I'm so sorry. I thought that was like 20 minutes worth of stuff.
So interesting. You guys were amazing. Okay, so let me read my closing here. Okay, thank you, Leia and Kevin, for joining us today for our session. We invite you to join us Wednesday, November 13th at 7 as we host producers from Detroit PBS, Bob Huck and David Krause with Matt Hamilton, as they share insights into Michigan and American Portrait. To register, please visit our website at lincolnpresidential.org/latest generation. Before you leave, we'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to complete our survey about today's webinar. Thanks once again for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you November 13th.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good luck on your project.
Wonderful. So great of you to be here. Thanks so much. Have a good one.